Yom Chamishi b'Shabbos. Today is Thursday, and it's Chov Teves. It's the yahrzeit of the Alter Rebbe. The Rebbe in Tafshin Chov Gimel, which is 49 years ago, when there was the 150th yahrzeit of the Alter Rebbe, made an extraordinary shturim, unbelievable shturim. In fact, at that point, the Rebbe was so involved, so verkocht in the Alter Rebbe, that there were all kinds of things that went on then. Tafshin Chav Gimel, I was -3, so I don't recall. But the Rebbe, there was a tzedakah initiated in increments of 150. People gave then tzedakah in amounts of 150. They divided up the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. There was a chalukah, the people should learn Alter Rebbe, and there was also chalukah of Tanya. There were all kinds of activities that were done in conjunction with the 150th year of the Alter Rebbe. Then, one of the more interesting little pieces of history was that there was a kvutza of people who were learning Hasidus that were called Chug Chaim. Chug, the group. Chug means the group. Chaim. Why were they called Chug Chaim? Because the first Maggid Shir in this group was Reb Gershon Chaim. I don't know very much about Reb Gershon Chaim, except that he was a very big god. And when he passed away, Steinsaltz, the Zange Stark, took over the Shir. I don't know if the Shir still goes on.
That was in Israel?
But yeah. And the outstanding characteristic of Chug Chaim was that President Shazar was the initiator and a regular participant in this group. And he would learn Hasidus. His name was Shnei Zalman. He was a very interesting man, Shazar. He certainly wasn't a fool. And he was obsessed with Alter Rebbe. It's like a koch in Alter Rebbe. And he learned Hasidus with Alter Rebbe. In fact, he arranged to have several volumes, I think it's 4 volumes, Alter Rebbe's Hasidus published through, there was a cultural fund that was giving money, probably from Germany originally, to print Yiddish Sfarim. And he got the Americans money to print Sfarim, and they printed 4 volumes of the Alter Rebbe's Hasidus. In Das Tachten, weil sehr gewollt. Mishamet is a Das that's what he wanted. And he was a member of this Chug Chaim. In fact, he was the organizer of it. And while he was the president of Israel, they would meet in Beis HaNasi, in the house of the Nasi, the house of the president in Israel. They would get together, and they would learn the Alter Rebbe's Hasidus. And when it came to Shnas HaKan, when it came to the 150th year, he got also very excited. And he printed a Sefer HaKan. I have it. Sefer HaKan, a book is called Kan. It's a little book. It came out in 1969. In other words, it came about 6 years late, or 5 years late after the fact. In it, you have various Maimorim, Sichas, articles about the Alter Rebbe in the 150th year. One of the more interesting things that appears in that book is an analysis of the Alter Rebbe's handwriting by a graphologist. And when the Rebbe saw the analysis, he said to Shazar, if you would not tell me personally that this man did not know the Alter Rebbe, I wouldn't believe you. In other words, he analyzed Alter Rebbe's handwriting. Alter Rebbe is so impressed by the accuracy. It was a woman, not a man, if I'm not mistaken. And the tiur, the description of the Alter Rebbe, you can read it, is true to form. It's mamish. In other words, handwriting analysis is, if you don't want people to know who you are, don't show them your handwriting, because it's real. It's a chokhmah mitas. And the Rebbe was very impressed with the credibility of the work. And Shazar said, I didn't tell him who it was. I didn't tell her at all who it was. I had no idea who they were, whose handwriting they were analyzing. And subsequently, this woman analyzed, I think there's a report of hers on the Marash's handwriting, and so forth. In any case, so 49 years ago, which was Tafshin Chav Gimel, that was 1963, we have made a big deal out of that. That was 150th year. But the big deal didn't start Chav Teves, Tafshin Chav Gimel. It started almost a year earlier. In other words, much before Chav Teves, I think from Chayalo already, the Rebbe was talking about the upcoming Chav Teves. So this year is the 199th yahrzeit of the Alter Rebbe. And we're beginning the Shnas HaMasayim. We're beginning the 200th year since the histalkus of the Alter Rebbe. So I guess it's time to start preparing ourselves for the fact that next Chav Teves we'll have the 200th yahrzeit of the Alter Rebbe. Make a big shturim, commemorations are very nice. We have to see these in Yonim B'Peil. We have a munah. This is real. That we shouldn't just anticipate a commemoration, we should anticipate a revelation, B'pashtus. But in any case, this is the beginning of the 200th years of the Alter Rebbe, and if the Rebbe made a big deal out of 150, certainly he's making a big deal out of 200. And it's left to us to actually celebrate it, to talk about the Alter Rebbe, to learn the Alter Rebbe's Teda, and to give tzedakah in increments of 200 and so forth. So I'm mentioning this because today is the Alter Rebbe's Yortzeit, Chavdal Teves. I heard from Richard Geroner, Al Shalom. Farbrengen Yeshiva a while back, more than a while back. And he mentioned that Richard Geroner knew a chassid by the name of Reb David Shifrin. When Rabbi Groner was a boy, a younger man, 18, 19, 17, he knew a chassid, lives in America, his name was David Shifrin. David Shifrin passed away in 1943. So in case you don't remember him, don't take it personally. He passed away in 1943. He lived in America. And he was the maskir of Agudas Chassidei Chabad. He was the secretary of Agudas Chassidei Chabad. And he used to raise money for Maimed, which he sent him Friedrich and Rebbe. And Yisrael Gordon told me that on the Maimed receipts, he wrote Lama Nikra Shmo Maimed. I'm not telling it to you verbatim, but the Teichen was, why did they call Maimed? Maimed means to support the Rebbe. So he wrote on the receipt, why is it called Maimed? Because it holds those who give, not those who are receiving. It holds those who give. That by giving money to the Rebbe, have a connection to the Rebbe, halt us. He was people tell me he was very organized. Every one of his receipts exists ad hayom hazeh. He was in touch with thousands of Chabad Yidden all over America. This is history now, unfortunately, but I've told this to you so many times that Rabbi Saul Jacobson, writes in his book, in his biography, that the Friedrich Rebbe once told him that there's three types of Chassidim. Chassidia Geza, Chassidia Nusach, and Chassidia Chabad. That means to say Chassidia Geza means they come from Chassidim. Chassidia Nusach means that they daven the Alter Rebbe's Nusach Ari. And Chassidia Chabad who learn Chassidus and Ha'oisek and Avodah Pnimis. In America in the 40s, there were hundreds of thousands of Chassidia Geza. I mean, many of the Jews who emigrated to America in 1880, in the turn of the century, and before World War I and after, were Russian Jews. And at least half of the Russian Jews in Russia, and logically, correspondingly, at least half of the Russian Jews who immigrated to America had a shaychus to Hasidus, and specific to Chabad. Lav Dafke Lubavitch, Kopust, there was Nezhin, there was Babroisk, there was Liadi, there were other branches, there was Retitza, but Chabad. In other words, Nuschari. There was a point in this country, there were hundreds of shuls called Nuschari, Beit Knesset Tzemach Tzedek, Anshe Chabad, Anshe Babroisk, Anshe Lubavitch, and Anshe so forth, all over America. And there were thousands and thousands and thousands of Yidden who were called Chassidi Ageza. In other words, they may not have even been frum, but they associated with the Rebbe. And when the Rebbe came, there was a certain kinship, there was a certain sense of connection between them and the Rebbe because of this attachedness. My father told me. It's so painful. My father was in Philadelphia in 1953. 1953, that's 60 years ago. And he met an old Yidel who said to him, mit 50 Jahr freier ist gestanden a ganze Mizrach und hat sich chabadet. He said to him, 50 years ago, which means 110 years ago from today, there was a whole wall of Yidden who stood and chabadet, daven bariches, daven all day long. Wo sind die Yidden? Wo sind ihre Kinder? Wo sind ihre Enkel? It's just mind-boggling. Jews came to America, Chassidim Chabazim gedavened and so forth. It's very tragic. But be that as it may, the Friedrich Rebbe talked about Chassidim HaGezer, Chassidim who were Chassidim by association, Gezer. Then there was Chassidim HaNusach, who daven from the Arshon Siddur. They're from a Yidden, they daven Nuschari, and then there's Chassidim Chabad. In any case, so the David Shifrin, this is an aside within an aside within an aside, if you can keep track. The David Shifrin was the maskir, he was the secretary of Gudish Chassidim Chabad, and he corresponded, he was in touch with thousands of Lubavitcher. I shouldn't say Lubavitcher, Chabadsker, whether they were Lubavitch or, but it didn't matter anymore. Many of these people sent money to support the Rebbe, Maimed, and other things for the yeshiva and the Levaitet. Many of them were not even from at this point, or their children weren't from. And there was a Chabad bulletin, and they used to have meetings, they used to have Farbrengens. David Shifrin did an incredible amount to keep the identity of Chabad Hasidim in America, on whatever level, whether it was Hasidi Ageza, Hasidi Nuzach, or Hasidi Chabad. So now, let's get back to the first aside. Reb David Shifrin, when he was a young man, remembered Reb Shmuel Ber Barisever. David Shifrin was a chassid of Reb Marash. And he remembered the senior chassidim of the Reb Marash. One of the chassidim he remembered was one of the great chassidim of the Tzemach Tzedek. Yet his name was Shmuel Ber Barisever. He was called in the Frierdiker's writings the Rajdam, Shmuel Dave Ber Mibarisev. He was a Meidnik Maskell. He was an incredible person. And the Shmuel Ber was a big chassid. In fact, there was a letter, a printed letter, for the Reb Marash, where the Rebbe Marash writes to the Hasidim in Zhembin, he had moved from Barza, that they have to give him an allowance, they have to support him. They have to give him a parnasa as a mashpia. This was his job. So the David Shifrin related, he recalled that he was by nature frugal. That means cheap. He didn't like to part with money. He was a big chassid, but he wasn't perfect. And he liked money. He didn't like to give his money away. And he didn't have a lot of it, I'm sure. But he was a big chassid, a meidnik maskell. He had a schwachkeit. He had gesser schwachkeiten. Any person's weakness that you can say in public is shena heiche madrege. Am erkennt es mefassem sein, das nicht gefällig. So he was always mocking the waste of money, the expenditures that were unnecessary. He was always like saying, what are you spending money today, wasting money? So of course Hasidim were always crazy, there's nothing new about it. So every month in Donnerstag they were raising a collection for Farbrengen. They were raising money for a cause. And the Shmuel Ber would laugh, of us patet Geld heint. What are you wasting money on today? Here is a Didan Notzach, and there's a Didan Notzach, and there's an I think you did a Notzach, and maybe did a Suffolk. Every month in Donnerstag Hasidim have excuses for Farbrengen. And he always would cynically comment at the waste of money and time and all the rest. So they were making a collection in Shul. He says, "Of was patet men Geld heint? What are you wasting money on today?" So I told him, "Chavdalet Teves." The Yurtzet of the Alter Rebbe. Chavdalet Teves. Yurtzet of the Alter Rebbe. Hat so getan. Van Alten Rebbe will ich euch geben a Pitak. What I think is a nickel. The Alter Rebbe is given a Yilud Isha Punkt wie Atmus Hus hat gewollt. Das ist ein Wort von a Grace and Chosset. In English it translates for the Alter Rebbe, I'm going to participate also. And all of a sudden he had money for this cause. The Alter Rebbe was a human being, born from a physical mother, exactly as the Eibishter designed him. In the image of God. That's the Alter Rebbe. Punkt for the Alter Rebbe. The greatness of the Alter Rebbe. In Teves Shalom it says, in the Sikh of Dalet Teves, a very modern Sikh from Samach Zayik, where the Alter Rebbe Rashab talked about the Alter Rebbe in very special ways. And amongst the different expressions that you have in that Shema, I think was Moshe Shabbos Kedesh V'Eirah, was that the Friedikes are nicht given Gresser for him. Those who came before were not greater than him. This Lashon, that if he would have been at the time of the Rishonim, it would have been a Rishon. In the time of the Goyim, it would have been a Gon. In the time of the Amiroim, it would have been an Amere. In the time of the Tanai, would have been a Tana. In the time of the Nevim, would have been a Navi. And I don't want to go beyond, further. Alter Rebbe was in a certain time and a certain space. And as much as we don't want to believe it, on some level at least, even the Alter Rebbe is influenced by the environment in which he lived. In other words, the world in which he lived, he was as great. In other words, there was so much expression from him that was possible. Had he been in a different time and had different Makablim, he would have given more. He would have been different based on the circumstances of the world. But he, in principle, could have been in any time, have been as great as any great people under any times, any circumstances, any times, any places. The Alter Rebbe. There's the art of the Alter Rebbe, the month from the Alter Rebbe. And of course, one of the things that's significant and also very timely, I think, is that we talk about the jubilees. We talk about 50-year intervals. I've mentioned this to you before. It says even in the Frierdiker Rebbe Sichos that a 50-year increment, a 50-year jubilee is significant. A 10-year mark or even a 25-year mark, and the Rebbe would celebrate 10 years and 25 years as significant, is not the same as 50, because 50 is a Geder in Teda. And there are very significant 50-year jubilees that come into play this year and next year that are really, really awesome. Awesome. When you see how it breaks down, you appreciate how incredibly awesome it is. 300 years ago this year, I don't know if I spoke about this here in 770, but I've spoken about the different groups. 300 years ago this year is a very, very significant anniversary. 300 years ago this year, the Baal Shem Tov was 13. He was turning 14. He was in his 14th year. And his birthday is Chayelo. In other words, the very end of the year. This is his 14th year, the Baal Shem Tov. During this year, 300 years ago this year, the Baal Shem Tov had introduced a new method of avodah to the tzaddikim nestorim. That as a result of this introduction, of this new method to the tzaddikim nestorim, the Baal Shem Tov at the age of 13 was elevated to some level of leadership within the group. He wasn't made a leader, the Baal Shem was very much still alive, but he was elevated to a certain standing of leadership in his yatsus, in council and so forth, based on the proposal that he made. And if you cut to the chase, in other words, if you cut away all the fat, and you just focus in on the nekuda, what was it that the Baal Shem Tov introduced 300 years ago this year that gave the tzaddikim nestorim a whole new approach to their work? It was the idea that before you help a yid beruchnius, you must help a yid begashmius. Before you help a Jew spiritually, you have to help him materially. You have to help yid with panos. And in many sichas, the Rebbe makes this observation. The first gilui of Chassidus was to help my yid begashmius. The first event that happened in the early history, this is even before Chassidus was officially Chassidus, was the idea that before you help a yid beruchnius, you have to help a yid begashmius. It's Alter Rebbe's Baal Shem Tov's chiddush, Baal Shem Tov's idea, and the Alter Rebbe followed the same tendency, the same derech, the same shita, without even knowing of the Baal Shem Tov. Alter Rebbe instinctively did the same thing, helping Yidden Begashmis before he helped the Baruchnius, although he had never heard of the Baal Shem Tov and he was at that point not a chassid at all, and so forth. That happened 300 years ago this year. So it says in the Likutei Deburim that the Frierdiker Rebbe writes that the Chassidim, I guess it meant the Niftarim, named the year Tov Ayin Beis Tova Yalav Bracha. Tov Ayin Beis, 300 years ago this year is Tov Ayin Beis, was an abbreviation Tova Yalav Bracha, which is why many Chassidim today are calling this year Shnas Tova Yalav Bracha. You know, every year people give Rosh Davis. And I am emphatically not into it. I think it's nonsense for Anoshim Kirkeinu to imitate the Rebbe. But in this case, it's not an imitation. This Avot from Frierdiker Rebbe is brought in Likutei Deburim, and the Frierdiker Rebbe had it been a Seder Sovis, that that's how it was 300 years ago. So this year, Tov Ayin Beis marks a 300th Jubilee. And you'll go through every 50 years. From that point, you will see that very, very significant events have occurred during these periods. To me, the striking thing is, and call me crazy, I don't mind, but I think these are very significant milestones. 200 years ago this year was the war between Napoleon and Russia. It started back in Hello. It continued into the next year, Ayin Gimel, but it's called the War of 1812, which continued into 1813, where, as we all know the history, the Alter Rebbe felt very, very strongly that Napoleon needs to be defeated. Napoleon is Tumah, Napoleon is Klippe, he's Ra. And in the Alter Rebbe's letter, the Alter Rebbe writes both things. First of all, if Napoleon wins, the Lashon is there will not be one single frum Yid in all of Europe. That's the Lashon. But he also writes that he's a Tzarat Seder. He describes him as a Hitler. He says, you think Yidden are going to become frei, but they're going to have good material lives. You don't understand. This is a bloodthirsty man. And in the end, not only won't be Ruchnius, but Kingash Misechet Nishrei. The Rebbe writes in his letter. It's a letter from the middle of Rebbe, where he's recollecting what happened during those few months as they were running away from Napoleon. He hated him betachos hasinim. And the Alter Rebbe had opposition. Alter Rebbe had opponents. Who were the opponents of the Alter Rebbe? Big tzaddikim. Big tzaddikim. In the Rebbe's letter it says, Yesh Eim Shayam Magid Bikoshnis. The Rebbe has a letter. Our Rebbe has a letter where the Rebbe says, Yesh Eimrim. And when the Rebbe says, Yesh Eimrim, you can consider it a fact. You know, like the Lashon of Frierdiker Rebbe was Badir, Badir Chefshes, Bamir Metavados, that the Koshnis are Magid, the Rebbe's opponent. And we all know it was a big machlekes. The Polish tzaddikim wanted Napoleon to win, Bonaparte. The Alter Rebbe wanted the Russians to win, Alexander. And the Polish knew exactly who Bonaparte was. They understood who Napoleon was. But they also understood that Russia is going to be bitter at Tzaras, gehackt at Tzaras. For Yidden berucht begashmis. The Alter Rebbe said Yidden are going to experience tzaras, but they'll remain frum. And the Polish Aguta Yidden said Napoleon will win if we had Yidden for Gashmias. And I heard once from Mashpia, the Farbrengen, he said that they'll keep Yidden frum on automatic pilot, which is Tzadik B'Manasa Yechaya. But the Mendel Rimenovit, who was also for the great Polish Tzadikim, who wanted Napoleon to win, hat sich jemot ausgedrückt. Soll man gehen in jüdische Blut bis de Knie. From Rimenov to Knipsit, whatever city it was, Abi Mashiach will come. They saw this as a moment for the coming of Mashiach. He said we should walk in Jewish blood till our knees. But Mashiach should come now. This is how they saw it upon him. The Alter Rebbe disagreed. And the Alter Rebbe won. Kedua, the Sipur, there's Kama Vakama Sipur, but one of the famous stories the Rebbe once mentioned by Farbrengen, that it was Gitpask and Lamaila, that Rebbe would blow Shefer first, would win. So the Kodesh Samagad got up very, very early. Yolofan and Mikveh, and he knocked off a Shachris, like we do in 770. And he picked up his Shefer, and he said, the Litvak hat mir ausgehabt. The Litvak, the Alter Rebbe defeated me. Alter Rebbe did a classic Lubavitcher thing. He got up, he took his time, went to the Mikveh, blew Shefer before davening. And the Kodesh Samagad said, the Litvak hat mir ausgehabt. And Napoleon was defeated. Bonaparte was defeated. What was the Teitzah of this? The Teitzah of this, that Yidden stayed in Russia, and for the most part, 80, 90%, you're talking, remained frum. In Russia, there were millions of Jews. The Rebbe holds and held that the majority of Jews in the world, the Rev Minyan of Yidden in the world, lived in Russia. In other words, 5, 6, 7 million Jews, maybe more. And the Rubam Kekulam were frum. Poor, oppressed, but frum. This is Alter Rebbe's choice. The price that was paid for this frumkeit was pushed a century, 100 years of very, very difficult service. And then exactly 100 years later, you have World War I. World War I starts in 1914, so it's 101 years later, 102 years later, but it's approximately 100 years later. And World War I was the same war, with the same personalities, and the same Rebbes, and the same attitudes. The Rebbe Rashab's feelings towards Kaiser Wilhelm were identical to the Alter Rebbe's feelings towards Napoleon. You could read the Sichos, you don't have to take my word for it. The Rebbe Nishma said about Wilhelm, who was an anti-Semite, but he was also a Apakatus. Tachas in this nation, the Rebbe Nishma hated Wilhelm the way the Alter Rebbe hated Napoleon. And the Rebbe Rashab ran away from Lubavitch because he didn't want to be under the German occupation, just as the Alter Rebbe ran away from the Adi because he didn't want to be under French occupation. Now the Germans lost, just like the French lost. But the world changed. In other words, the Teitzah, the result that would have been had Napoleon won the war, happened 100 years later. After World War I, the Jewish world changed radically. I mean, the world b'chlau. I mean, the world we live in is a post-World War I world. In other words, although World War II was a much more traumatic event than was World War I. I mean, you can't compare. But after World War II, the world went back to what it was before World War II. The world, the map of the world was rewritten. The definition of what's normal and what's crazy was fixed at the Treaty of Versailles. World War I is one of the most important events in human history. Because after World War I, the world was changed completely. And as much as it affected Yidden, in Poshet and Das Tachten, this is not something which is so lofty and so exotic. If before World War I, most of the Yidden in the world were frum, post-World War I, most Yidden in the world are not frum, unfortunately. And, in the words of the Rambam, we're holding now by the idea of Tshuva, the coming of Mashiach Tzedkenu. And now we're celebrating approximately another century since then. Now, what's going to happen, I don't know. But that this dates are significant, I think when you see such a pattern, it's pretty powerful to see such kinds of patterns. I'm mentioning it in conjunction with Chadal Teves. Don't get nervous, don't worry. Do good things. Nervousness and worry is not going to make a difference anyway, but to me these are very, very significant historical milestones. This year, next year, the following year, we're now a century after the war with Alter Rebbe davened for Napoleon to lose. The world has gone full circle. It's a Hat Mashem Bat Tshuva, We've gotten so sick that it's wiltig sein gesund. When the world gets crazy enough, the world says, maybe it's time, maybe normal is not so crazy after all. When you're crazy enough, tigel naf yescham, the oisgelassenkeit, the permissiveness, the wildkeit, the lack of self-control and constraint gets so bad, you push it disgusted with yourself. And it's wiltig tshuvaton. Yeah, in effect. Chaleifin today is Alter Rebbe's Yortzeit. And it's a Yom Segula. Wie the Welt sagt, Zechusa Yagan Aleinu. It's a Yom Segula, it's an Eis Ratzon, to mention the Alter Rebbe and to connect ourselves to the Alter Rebbe on many, many levels. The Avodah of the Alter Rebbe, the Derech of the Alter Rebbe. What was the Alter Rebbe's life? An interesting thing. The Alter Rebbe's life was emes. Emes. You were never going to meet a man who was more obsessive with emes than the Alter Rebbe. And it stands to reason that as the Alter Rebbe's life neared its end, the obsession with emes became even more emestic, more precise, more exact. What was the last thing the Alter Rebbe wrote? The last thing the Alter Rebbe wrote was that the greatest emes that could be is chesed she'ein shel emes. That in the real world, in el mazeh hagashmi, when a person does a favor for somebody else, and he's doing it because he wants to get something back, and he's not doing it l'shem shamayim, and he's not doing it altruistically, but in the end he did a good maise and eila mazeh ha-maise. This is the greatest truth. The Rebbe wrote a maimer right before his histalkus, which is printed in Me'ah Sha'arim. It's printed in one of the Likutei Sichos, and it's also in the Igros Keish the Alter Rebbe, Nefesh HaShfeila. And one year Chadal Teves actually brought it in and we learned it, where the Alter Rebbe says that it says in Chazal, Chesed ve'emes nifgosh, that kindness and truth met. Kindness and truth met. What happens when kindness and truth meets? Kindness doesn't shut up, and truth has nothing to say. Chesed hat nicht auf plappeln, und emes hat nicht was zu sagen. Kindness and truth met. And emes omar al yivra. Midas emes says, don't make a world. Why? Because the world is sheker. And chesed omar yivra. And kindness says to make a world even though it's going to be sheker. Because in the sheker of this world, you can have a bisala emes. A little emes. And the little emes, ne'elam ha-sheker, is more emes than the greatest emes, which is by itself. And the Eibishter listened to Midas HaChesed. He didn't listen to Midas HaEmes. V'harayeh. He says, da Welt. If the Eibishter created a world, right? And pretty much we're sure there's a world, right? I remember the Rebbe once pointed at somebody, a little boy, and he said to him, "From man face du, as da Welt." And he said, because it says in the Torah, Brechus Baralakim. As they state in Torah, Brechus Baralakim, because I'm from the Rebbe Marash. How do you know the world is real? Not because you see it, because your eyes can mislead you. But because it says in the Torah, Emes. Brechus Baralakim is from da Welt. And it's Eilam HaSheker. And we come, our neshama comes from Gan Eden into Eilam HaSheker, to live within the framework of Eilam HaSheker, and be matzliach in Eilam HaSheker. There's a letter from the Rebbe, in Igros Keish, to an Israeli Lubavitcher, from 1952 or 53. The Rebbe wanted for him to get involved in Askonas, to get involved in, he was living in Kfar Chabad then, to get involved in a leadership position within the framework of Lubavitch. So he wrote the Rebbe letters. I'll be very happy to undertake it, but I would like the people of Kfar Chabad to recognize that this is my position. You're going to give me a job, and I'm going to become a doormat. Because if the people of Kfar Chabad don't recognize that I've been empowered in a certain position, so here I am going to be working hard, and all they're going to do is undermine all my work. And the Rebbe says to him, if we are going to wait in order to do good things, to get the necessary honor, to do it within a framework of normalcy, that the Mashiach line come and it'll take forever. It's not going to happen. The whole reality of Torah is that it's Torah Emes and Eilam HaSheker. That you find a way in a world of Sheker to reveal the Emes Havaya L'Yelam. The Emes, in other words, this is an idea which all of us understand. The Rebbe is Emes Lamite. And when the Rebbe created Shlichus and sent Shluchim and built Batei Chabad and all the other Meisters, the Rebbe understands that he's building it in Eilam HaSheker. And in Eilam HaSheker, things operate in a oifen that's not Emes La'amite. So the last thing The Alter Rebbe wrote right before his histalkus. Now, Alter Rebbe was unquestionably a man of absolute emes. Was that the greatest emes that could be is to figure out how to navigate and to negotiate into Elam HaSheker, a drop of emes. Even if because you're bringing this emes into Elam HaSheker, the emes itself is a emes she'ein shel emes. It's a chesed she'ein shel emes. That's the Lashon. Chesed she'ein. I'm doing a kindness, and it's not l'shem shamayim. The bottom line is we did a good thing. If you think about America, one of the most interesting things in America, Americans give a lot of tzedakah. They give an incredible amount of tzedakah. Today in America, if you're very, very rich, you have to give tzedakah. Because anisht, you look bad. It's been built into the society. The other name. The bottom line is our civilization has been conditioned that if you are wealthy, you have to share your wealth. Now, of course, you're not sharing your wealth because you're a nice guy. You're sharing your wealth so people should say you're a nice guy. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The poor person doesn't care whether you gave it to him altruistically or not altruistically. My father told me once, there was a dinner for yeshiva. There was a Größer Gwir who donated in the 1960s $50,000. And he ran the dinner from his office. The yeshiva did nothing. He invited all the guests, he sent out the invitations, and he set the table ausgemacht. And at the dinner, he was given a plaque which costed $32,000. Now, das is a madrege. In other words, he gave $50,000 to the yeshiva, and the kickback was 2/3. But the yeshiva got $18,000. $18,000 then was worth making a dinner for. So you can get angry, and say, what a lowlife, and Einach Hanami, he's taka lowlife. But the Rebbe Mechamed Ashirim, the Eibush decided to give him money and not somebody else money. Because his need for covet is so big that it will pay $50,000 for a bissel covet. A zweite darf nicht haben the covet, das erhalten the Geld. So he's taka, midas ha'emes, and for midas ha'emes hat man gar nicht. The world is not a world. So this is interesting. The Alter Rebbe's whole, in other words, the culmination of his life was what we call today to make a difference in the real world, even if the difference we're making is not so ideal. To sit around and talk about idealism and mitanemes and mitasheker and cover the hin and cover the head is immaterial. People do good things. It doesn't really matter what their motivation is. If they do good things, they're making the world a good place. And this brings Mashiach to King. So I mentioned this begesher with the Alter Rebbe. I'm going to get to Chavdal Teves. I'll finish with a story. Ein interessanter Mais. A chassid was Alter Rebbe of Neil in Hadich. A chassid came to Alter Rebbe in Gadich. Hadich is very far away from Lubavitch. And he was Bamtian of Alter Rebbe, and two businessmen, two what you would consider modern-looking Jews, walked into the Tzion. They took out Tillins, and they started saying Tillim. And as they started saying Tillim, they started to cry. Like fountains of tears. They just were sobbing. Crying and crying and crying. This chassid looks at these two men, and it's clear to him that these are not Hasidic Yidden, these are modern Jews, relatively speaking. And he was a bit taken aback by their passion, by their regish. They came to the Alter Rebbe. So when they finally left the oyel, he approached them and said, I know this is none of my business, but you don't look like Hasidim. How does it come to you that you should come to the Alter Rebbe's Tzion B'chalal, and that you should cry as Elchad Mois? So they told him the following story. They're from a Yidden, from a shtetl, who went out together into the world to make for themselves a parnosa, make a living. And as they traveled year after year after year, they started to become more and more lax in Shmiras HaMitzvahs. In other words, they had a wife and they had a family, and which they would visit, I'm sure, for many months or each year, where they were frum. They pretended to be frum. But en route, when they traveled, it was harder and harder for them to be Makayim Surmina. They were Mekel in Shabbos, they were Mekel in Kashrus, and so on. He says, we came to a motel recently, and the proprietor, the owner of the motel, looked at us. He said, you're Jews. Would you like kosher food or non-kosher food? And he explained, if you want non-kosher food, I can feed you immediately. If you want kosher food, I have to prepare it. So they told him, we're not so particular about kosher, abiyas. We're hungry, we're tired, feed us. So he led them to their room, with them in their room, and locked them in. And they realized that they were on a second floor. The door was locked from the outside, and there were bars on the windows. A little while later, this man returns, bloodshot, drunk, with his son, and hatchets. And they tell these two Jews, get yourself ready, because we are going to dispatch you, we're going to kill you and bury you, and we're going to keep your wealth, keep your money. So they start to reason with this man. When a person comes to a hotel, you kill him. He said, this is what we do. We have what looks like a motel, and in reality, any person who passes through that we feel has substantial sums of money, we make them disappear, and we keep what we find. We have to plead with mercy, and these two angry goyim looked at them viciously and said, this is not going to help you, we're going to kill you. So when they realized that these people taka mean business, so they said to them, give us a little while to prepare ourselves. We'll do tshuva and so forth. So they locked them in again, and these two yidden give them tshuva. And now they had an opportunity to think about their lives, and how over the course of years they had become less and less observant and careful. And they did tshuva, waiting for the Malach HaMoves. And the tshuva went on for many hours. And finally, after midnight, the door opens. And by this point, there were no tears left in their tear ducts, so they're expecting to be killed. In walks the goy with his son, with platters of kosher food. And he says, Esk isn't it? So they look at this goy, makarapo, exactly what transpired, what happened. So the goy told them as follows: 15 years ago, a holy man died in this room. And right before he died, he called me. And he said to me, if Jewish people will ever come here and say that they do not need to eat kosher, you should do what you need to do. He says it's 15 years later. And I never forgot the words of that holy man. And when you said you didn't need to be kosher, I remembered what that holy man told me, and I did what I needed to do. And now eat. So they said to this guy, this holy man died in this room, where is he buried? We want to go visit his tiyah. This is why they came to the mountain of them. The mice was down to them.